You're closer with some guys than you are with others. You have more in common. Line of work because tomorrow they get traded.
Right.
Ready?
Hey, this is Ken Casey from the Dropkick Murphys.
Okay,
and
we're ready.
I love the Grandstanders! Take it away, kid.
This is good.
Welcome to another edition of Grandstanders Live. I'm your host, Scott Kerman, and I'm joined by my usual cohorts, the Professor, Ralph Stevens, and Uncle Joe McLaughlin. Well, we have a special guest via Skype tonight. He is the longtime voice of our Boston Celtics. Since 2001, he's teamed up with Cedric Maxwell, which, guys, puts him second to the legendary Johnny Most. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome to our show Sean Grande. Sean, thanks for joining us here on a very exciting night, NBA draft, pre-draft. But we can't start with that when we have Sean Grande on. The first question we have to ask is wrestling, of course. And he was born in 1971 in New York City. So I'm figuring 5 years old, you started watching wrestling. So who's your favorite wrestler, 1970s, early 80s?
I was older when I came into it. I was about 8, 9 years old.
Okay.
And I grew up because there are so many people before me who were Bruno Sammartino people, especially in this part of the country. And the Hulk Hogan people came after me. But I'm in the Bob Backlund pocket. That was me.
Okay.
I was the Backlund guy. He was much more popular in New York than he was here.
Yeah.
In New England, some of the satellite cities on the circuit. But 2 years ago, maybe at SummerSlam, I finally got to meet him because he went back to work for WWE, and I've got this, this picture of Bob Backlund. It's amazing what you remember from when you were a kid. I can still to this day list all of his title defenses for the 6 years he was champion at Madison Square Garden in chronological order, which I often call a party trick for what I only imagine would be the worst party ever thrown by anyone.
Pedro Morales was huge around here back in that day. How about New York?
Oh, he was. Well, I came in. He came back. He had that sort of second run in the early '80s with the Intercontinental title, working with Don Morocco a lot. So, yeah, I got a lot of. There was a lot of Pedro Morales on the undercard in my pro wrestling childhood in New York.
So, did you light a candle when hearing George the Animal Steel died a few months ago?
Disappointing. It was always. It's funny, isn't it? It's a beautiful thing. We know now the whole story, how he was a school teacher during the year. But when you're 8 years old and 9 years old, he was just this crazy guy that would show up in the summer, and you never did the math on that kind of thing. And it's funny. He probably made more money that last year or two when WWF exploded and the Hulk Hogan era, when he did all that stuff with Randy Savage and Elizabeth. Probably made more money in that last year or two than he made in the 30 years that came before it.
Was that your
pension as a teacher, though?
Was that your most intense fan experience growing up, Sean, for the wrestling, or what would you consider yourself in terms of the height of your fandom?
This will be painful, but I'm going to say it out loud for you guys because we're all friends, and I think I've lived now more than half my life here, and obviously I think the first line of my obituary is going to be voice of the Boston Celtics. I think we've crossed over that line. But my son, who's almost 6, we were watching, he was learning about Steve Bartman over the weekend, and that documentary he did in the 30 for 30, so of course the Bill Buckner stuff came up, and I had to explain to him that when I was, whatever I was, 14, 15 years old, I was explaining to him when the Bill Buckner play happened that there was a 14-year-old in the upper deck at Shea Stadium that night who was a very happy 14-year-old.
Really?
I was a lifelong Mets fan growing up. I was there. I was at that game, and I had like Sunday season tickets maybe when I got to that age. That was like a big present for me. So we had Sunday season tickets that gave you the option to buy playoff tickets, and I got Game 2 and Game 6 of the World Series in '86, and I was way up in the upper deck, but I was one of those guys looking out like I am now. I glanced up because I was in the catatonic state after the Dave Henderson home run off Aguilera. I was in a catatonic state that we had lost the game, and I looked up at the scoreboard and saw, congratulations, Red Sox 1986 world champions.
That's crazy.
Well, thanks, Sean, for bringing up that very painful experience.
I can make something up, but you asked. I saw Larry Bird hit a game winner. His rookie year, I was 8 or 9 years old. My dad took me to a Knicks game at Madison Square Garden, and Larry Bird in his rookie year had a game winner very late in that game.
And did you have any? Were you convinced that you wanted to be a sportscaster? And could you have imagined ever getting to the point when you're at that game that you'd be announcing?
Professionally,
right?
It was my dream. When you're a city kid, and this is not a Boston kid, but a New York kid, your athletic options are really limited.
Sure.
I mean, your knees are gone by the time you're 8 years old because all you do is play on concrete and everything's all scraped up. There's no ice. My son's starting to play ice hockey a little bit. Yeah. There's no ice. There's no ice hockey in New York. You play street hockey or whatever. So your athletic options are limited. And there is somewhere, it'll come out someday, probably when my mother needs money. There is a tape of me at 6 years old getting called to Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm sitting there doing the football game into a tape recorder off the TV. Great. So I think there was some element of destiny to it. And, when I go back to Madison Square Garden, it's a big deal for me. I try every night that I'm doing this job. At every job you do, whatever it is your job is, it can become routine. It can become run-of-the-mill. And I try every night before I start a broadcast to make eye contact, to find some 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid in the crowd to remind me of where I am and what I am doing, that no matter how difficult the travel gets, you're doing 4 games in 5 nights. In the last 2 years, I've been doing the fights for Spike TV and some insane travel, and it will wear you down and beat you up, and you can lose your love for it pretty easily. But it doesn't take much to sort of snap you back into the reality that there aren't a lot of people who are able to, make their dreams come true, and I'm one of the lucky people.
That's terrific.
You're not doing the Spike TV anymore. Was the travel schedule too tough for you?
It was too much, and it was nobody's fault. When I signed on with Spike 2 years ago, and I decided I had some different options, and I decided to take a leap off a professional cliff and try something brand new, a sport I did not know, and it was an adventure I could not, even now I find it difficult to describe it. It was such a positive experience, such a great experience, such success with the telecast that we did and making real sports, high-level sports television for this sport that I think really deserved it. But what happened is the evolution of the company, the growth of the company, it's Bellator, the number 2 company to the UFC, it grew so fast, so big, that I signed on to do 16 shows in a year, which you figure 8 during the season, 8 during the off season, give or take. And we ended up doing 18 shows last year during the NBA season because the company's grown so quickly, and so many of those were international shows that the Celtics were playing a home game, they'd have a couple days off, they'd go to San Antonio. I was going to Budapest, Hungary, and Torino, Italy, and Dublin, Ireland, and doing these crazy back and forths, and they had these international tours where they do 2 shows in 6 days, and all of my friends on the production team, my broadcast partner, Jimmy Smith, they were staying out there having this great junket and going to cities in between and spending a week there. I was coming back to the States, doing a couple of Celtic games, and then flying back to rejoin the crew in Europe. So it became too much, too soon, too quickly. And so we talked about the different options. And, at the end of the day, as I told Rich Gotham's the president of the Celtics, when it finally just all came to a head that, I'm a dad and I'm a Celtic first.
Oh, that's great. Well, we'll get you for 82 games this year then, right?
Well, let's not go completely over. You never really know. But let me put it this way. If I were doing, say, a college basketball on Fox in Storrs, Connecticut, I'd walk there rather than have to go back to Hungary or Yugoslavia or wherever it is that the Bellator shows are going to end up being. Because MMA is just taking off around the world, and it's been great. It's just that the schedule with Bellator no longer it was in direct conflict with the NBA. It was never a perfect fit, but it was manageable, and it just kind of spiraled out of control.
All right, so we got to talk, of course, about the first thing when we think about the Celtics this week was the trade. So when you heard the trade and when you heard the details of the trade, what was your reaction?
What I had been saying for a few weeks earlier. Danny is a dangerous guy picking at 21. You give him control of the board, and some crazy things are going to happen. I wasn't really shocked. I knew that Fultz is a really high-level player. He wasn't the perfect fit for the Celtics, and I didn't think the Celtics liked – when I say they didn't like him, I use this term often in the Matthew Berry sense of the word, meaning I don't like him as much as other people do. I've always felt that way about Kevin Love, for example. That Kevin Love's a great player, but I don't like him as much as other people do. I think that's how the Celtics felt about Fultz. And I thought the reaction was interesting. People became so enamored with the number 1 pick and the sex appeal of it that they didn't even consider what Danny was doing. And if Bill Belichick traded the number 1 pick to get the number 3 pick and more assets, everybody would be saying, what another genius move by Bill Belichick. But Danny, who's drafted as well as anybody pretty much in the NBA over the last, in his 14, 15-year tenure, did not get the benefit of the doubt in making the move. And what I think this time of year is interesting when fans get passionate and reactionary, which is awesome and a fan's job to do, is I tend to ask the question, how many Markelle Fultz games did you stay up and watch last year at the University of Washington? Or are you reading all the big boards and deciding, because the majority of people feel he is the best player, that was the perfect player for the Celtics to take?
Well, I think a legitimate criticism, and that's what I was criticizing the most, was the timing of it. Was why couldn't he have just pure negotiations? Would he could have heard more offers from other teams, or maybe Sixers sweeten the pot? Because we know, people, the teams get excited as it goes on, but the timing of it over the weekend. He had 5 or 6 days. You felt like he had more negotiations.
Well, I would feel that way about the number 3 pick, which is very much in play to me. I don't think necessarily the player the Celtics take tomorrow night is going to be a Celtic. I think there's still many, many possibilities in play. And we don't know, and I haven't talked to Danny in the last 48 hours about what the options were and different teams he has talked to about that number 1 pick. And I think, perception-wise, I can certainly see that. But the Celtics have had the number 1 pick for what? 3 or 4 weeks now. So there was more than one team that Danny had a conversation with about that pick.
Oh, yeah, and he seems to have started some dominoes tumbling with now the Lakers getting involved. And I want to get your opinion on that. Now, the Lakers, the Nets, who do you think won that trade, and how do you think that's going to affect the Celtics going forward? Because, with Celtics owning their draft picks next year.
I don't think it necessarily makes Brooklyn much better next year. I think there's a high-end option there. I think it was the right decision for both teams to make. Whether it gives Brooklyn a lot more wins next year, 21-year-old point guards don't add a ton of wins. There's high upside with that player, Russell. There's no question about it. I think it makes the Lakers better immediately if Lopez can stay healthy, because I think the Celtics have been much better than Brooklyn the last couple of years, but if you've watched any of those games, you know how difficult Lopez can be. And the fact that he added the three-point shot because he had to this year, was a guy who had made like 5 of them in his NBA career, and he took, 200 of them. He took a ridiculous number of threes, so he's added that to his game as well. I think it's really going to help the Lakers. I think the Lakers are very much in play now going forward. I think it's the injection that they needed. I think the stuff going on in Cleveland right now makes you wonder about the future, the immediate future of the Cavs, and the dominoes that come with that. Listen, whoever we decided to vote as the MVP this year, that's great. But we know this is LeBron James' league, and what he decides to do is going to be the biggest domino to fall for all of these teams. And I think if you're a fan of the Lakers today, you're feeling a lot better about life than you did 72 hours ago.
They're not going to fall between 2 and 5, you think?
What's that?
So their draft pick probably won't fall between 2 and 5 next year.
You know what? The Nets pick.
know.
I don't. How many teams are going to be better? The Lakers pick might not. The Nets pick. Listen, there's a million things that can happen between now and opening night. Yeah. I would be surprised if the Nets took a major step forward next year. I think the things that they're going to do, including the trade yesterday, I think that was exactly the right thing to do, and it's going to help them. The Nets are on a long road. This Garnett trade, the Pierce Garnett trade, that's going to be ancient history, and all the picks will have been disseminated and given to Danny. By the time the Nets get this thing back turned around, this trade will be ancient history. But the Lakers, I think, took a more immediate step forward.
Sean, based on your history with Danny, how likely is it, do you think if he makes the pick tomorrow, that he'll just pick the best player regardless of position? Because one of the things that seems to be a late move towards Tatum over the last few days, and I'm now just sort of gearing myself to be surprised tomorrow night that it'll be Fox or Dennis Smith or maybe another trade, which would suggest that's just Danny. If he takes a guard, especially a point guard, that's just Danny saying, I'm taking the best player regardless of position.
And, the Smith pick, if let's say he can't make a move to go down, and he has become completely enamored with Smith, a scenario which I don't think is that much of a stretch. Smith then becomes Rozier in the fact that this is a really good player that Danny really likes, but clearly there were other people on the board that most teams like better, Fox being an example, Jackson and Tatum obviously being an example as well. So if, remember what happened. Remember how that draft unfolded. The Celtics went crazy trying to get Winslow, offering up the moon, and Michael Jordan not only turned all that down, he then didn't take Winslow and took Kaminsky instead. That's how that draft unfolded. And then the Celtics got to a player. This is the thing to remember about Dennis Smith or about Danny's mindset. When he took Rozier, he wanted Rozier. Any of you that have ever been in a rotisserie league or fantasy league, or showing my age there, in a fantasy league, when you are picking, there's a player you want. Maybe it's too early, but you're not going to get him on the way back. So you have to make a decision. Am I going to take this guy now or not? And Rozier was that guy for the Celtics a couple of years ago, and maybe Dennis Smith is that guy now. I think Dennis Smith at 3 is not great value, but it's certainly a player that Danny likes.
Yeah, I wonder if that's last year we had, when Wick went in and announced that pick, the Jaylen Brown pick, he got booed. Ooh, yeah. Dennis Smith's probably the guy that gets Wick booed tomorrow, but Jaylen Brown turned out to be a hell of a pick. I mean, I just, to Sean's point, if that's the guy he wants, I think we'll be on texting each other saying, what the hell is he picking another point guard for? It'll get booed, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't think Wick is going up to any podium tomorrow. What do you think?
He's going to send Sean up or Matt.
Yeah, he should be deferring. Yeah, Scala's exactly what I would do. By the way, Scal is pretty much the answer for most questions like that. Who should we have do this? Who should we have do that? Who should sit in the dunk tank at the carnival? Who should announce it? I would choose Scal virtually everything.
That's good.
Wait, I just want to say something about the whole trade. That Winslow comparison was why a lot of fans were kind of angry with what we received, because we heard Winslow, you had to try to give up everything and you still couldn't move up. So that was still in the back of my mind when all of a sudden I hear that trade. And so I just wanted to kind of just get that out in the open, that why fans reacted the way they did. And it was pretty outrageous the way we reacted.
It could end up being, worst case scenario, like a pick in the 20s 2 years from now.
Because Danny trained us that to move up spots, it's very expensive.
Yeah. I don't think there's any question. I think we have to. The problem here's with virtually all of the things we're discussing. Here's the issue: we live in the age of immediacy. Talk shows. Sure. We want to debate all this stuff and argue it, and that's the beauty of it. The problem is we will not. The end of the Celtics-Nets trade and how it all played out. How many years will have to go by before we really know how it all played out? With that one, we have a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
But for the example of giving up a chance to draft Fultz, to get Tatum, or to get Jackson, or to move down a few spots and get Dennis Smith, however this whole thing plays out, when will we truly know about this? I mean, the Rozier thing, that was the first time in all of my years here that people actually turned on me, because I liked the Rozier. I had done a Louisville game a year before, and I had seen Rozier in the games I was watching to prep for my game, and I really liked Rozier and always had that in the back of my head. And all I said that night was, go crazy if you want. You're going to like this player. And I remember people just losing their minds about that pick, and they were coming at me for liking that pick. When will we know about Rozier? We can say we know about James Young if you want to make the call. It's still... I don't like to make a call on players until they're 23, 24 years old at least. Maybe no better example than Gerald Green. How do you rate the career Gerald Green has had when everybody completely gave up on him and he forced his way back in the league and became a valuable NBA player? So I would say for the most part, we never know half of what we think we know. When it comes to 19, 20-year-old players, we know virtually nothing.
Danny's trying to do something really, really hard that really no other, I think, GM in the league is trying to do, which is he's trying to balance being good year 1 to 3 now, and then also being good from year 3 to 5, right? And it feels like every move down, every way of keeping his option value as high as possible is an attempt to keep that balance between year 1 to 3 and setting yourself up for if LeBron
Still
leaves,
a good team.
and if LeBron leaves and Steph Curry's ankles go, you could be in a position to take advantage of that, but at the same time understanding that my real window might not be until down the road.
I think the notion that you just expressed is something that a lot of us, and I think fans are talking about now. The Cleveland window, the Golden State window, 1 to 3 versus 4 to 6. I think Danny's focus, I think Brad Stevens' focus, I think the organizational focus is not on year 2 or year 4 or year 5. It's about being the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah.
It's about being around it every year. It's about maintaining a roster and a salary cap flexibility that always is going to keep you in the conversation for the big free agents, always going to keep you in contention, always going to keep you around it for the years. And I'm not talking about the Tim Duncans. They got, outrageously fortunate. They had David Robinson, and they had Tim Duncan for all those years. Let's talk about the Spurs of the last 6 or 7 years. They're always around it. They're always one of the best teams, and one of those years they got to the finals and they won it. And I think that's what you want to be. The Gold Standard. You can't plan to get LeBron. You can't plan to get Tim Duncan, but you can plan to manage your cap, your franchise, and your assets in a way that's going to keep you in the conversation every year.
Yeah, it's a great way.
How confident do you think the Celtics are, and of course this would affect draft night, in signing another free agent, a Hayward, a Griffin? Do you think they're confident enough, and how much will that affect what happens tomorrow night?
I think that you might get a tip of the hand might get tipped a little bit by who the Celtics take. I think they're certainly in the conversation. And how can you not be when it goes? Basically, any player that's in play, Paul George, Jimmy Butler, Gordon. This is what I was talking about the Spurs thing. Everybody that's in play right now, Gordon Hayward, Jimmy Butler, Paul George, you name it. The Celtics are in the conversation. They have the opportunity. How many teams, by the way, would say, boy, I'd love to have Gordon Hayward, but he wouldn't want to play there. They don't have the cap room. They don't have the right roster. In almost every scenario, the Celtics are in all of these conversations. So that said, just by the law of large numbers, says one of these things is going to work out.
So the Celtics are a team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals, but yet could probably turn over half their roster next year. And is that really a referendum on what a great coach Brad Stevens is, that he took a team like this to the Eastern Conference Finals?
I think that Brad he's the victim of his own success, and that the expectations now are higher every year, because you could make the case in each year, maybe with this last one being the exception, that they've won more games than they were supposed to win. And every year they would come back. They won the 40 games, going 24 and whatever, they 24-12 in the final 36 in 2015, and everyone said, boy, they're going to win 47, 48 games. And I said, whoa, that's a huge jump. The expectations are too high because you got the 40 wins, and then they went and did it. And then this year, after 48 wins, everyone's like, oh, you got Al Horford, they're going to win 52, 53. I was like, wait a minute. To go in 2 years from 24 to 50, that's a huge – and they went and did it. So I think what's interesting is that I kept saying my initial instinct on the night of Game 7 or whatever, Game 1 of the conference finals, was the Celtics are in the conference finals, and they have the number 1 pick in the draft. This might never happen. And then I realized it could happen next year, easily.
Right. True, yeah.
Okay, we love Isaiah Thomas, and look, for what we acquired him for and what he's produced, it's remarkable. It's almost unheard of. But yet, a lot of fans, Celtics fans, criticize IT. Why does he catch so much flack?
I don't know if it's flack. I think fans are concerned about what I hear all the time is fans are concerned about the max contract. Well, Isaiah's not a max player. Okay, well, first of all, what's a max player and what's not a max player? You can have that conversation. And didn't Isaiah himself diffuse all this in his season-ending news conference when he was, getting ready to have surgery and looking at all the options, when he made it clear that's not his goal. His goal is to win in Boston, and I think he is smart enough to know that him getting a max contract could be a setback for the franchise sort of setting this up to win. People were upset at Al Horford getting a max contract with what he produced. First of all, as if it's their money, which always is like, how can you pay him? All right, relax. First of all, it's not your money, number one. Number two, there were 4 other teams ready to pay Al Horford max money. So that was the price for Al Horford. I don't know what the price is going to be for Isaiah Thomas, but I guarantee you he will work. I just feel strongly he's going to work within the Danny Ainge parameters, and they're going to have conversations about what makes the most sense. But I don't know what the criticism is of Isaiah other than what on earth could you ask for from a player
Total
more than
gamer.
what Isaiah's given you? I don't get it.
Sean, there are two guys on the team I'm particularly interested in your point of view on, you having watched them play 82 games this last year, and that are really maybe pivotal in the future success. One is Jaylen Brown, and the other is Marcus Smart. And what's your point of view on their future and their upside moving forward?
I would say this. Max and I are probably the two driving the Marcus Smart bandwagon. We were sort of at the head of the class. I remember doing, interviews for the sake of a soundbite, basically saying, if there's any conversation that Danny's having about trading Marcus Smart in any of those trade deadline deals, I'm going to beep in on call waiting to break it up. Because to me, Marcus Smart is the kind of player that you win championships with. If he's your sixth guy, your seventh guy, whatever. Marcus Smart is the guy you want on your team who competes every play. That said, I was he didn't have a great final third of the season. There were injury issues I think he was dealing with. We found out a little bit more about those at the end of the year. And I'm generally of the opinion that if there's one thing a young player can't do, it's shoot. I'm okay with that because that's generally an area where guys can get better. And Marcus Smart is that typical guy. The things he has, you can't teach, and the things that he doesn't have, you can. So I'm a huge Marcus guy, even with the last 20 or 30 games he had. Jaylen Brown and potentially Tatum or Jackson or whatever happens tomorrow are in a very interesting spot to be the third pick in the draft and to walk into a situation where it's very tough to earn playing time. How impressive was Jaylen Brown? He got a rotation spot in training camp on what was a very deep team and obviously an Eastern Conference Finals team. That's pretty impressive for a 20-year-old rookie. I love his poise. I love his intellect. I love the way he approaches the game because the athleticism speaks for itself. And I think you could see he played like a 20-year-old towards the end of the year, and that was, first of all, didn't blink under the bright lights. He had good games, he had bad games, but he kept competing and kept participating and earning minutes in extremely high-level playoff games, and that to me bodes very well.
Okay, I'm so tired of hearing the name Jimmy Butler. I've never heard more rumors about one player. He's going to every team. So would Jimmy Butler be a good fit for the Celtics?
Yes, and let me give you the classic non-answer answer, yes and no. And here's why. Jimmy Butler and Gordon Hayward both fall under the same heading to me. These are elite players. These are very high-level players. Butler in particular, I love the two-way game, and I love generally Marquette players. But therein lies the problem. To me, what's the baseball stat that became in vogue? The VORP, the value over replacement, whatever. Yeah. You got a really good player who remains underrated at the small forward spot. So the question when it comes to how much are you giving up for Gordon Hayward, for Jimmy Butler to make this move, when your small forward spot, which is occupied by Jay Crowder, how much are you improving that spot to go from a $5 million player to a max contract player? What are you giving up to get that player? My biggest concern is what are you doing? How much are you altering the franchise to improve your small forward spot this much? That's my big concern about the three spot, about Hayward, about Butler.
Well, we have a couple minutes left, and I had to ask you about the 30-30 Celtics-Lakers, which just 5 hours of Celtics porn, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I was lucky enough because I'm a super special VIP. I got an advance copy, so I was able to watch it and tweet out. For those of you, this is what in advance of people saying, I said, for those of you who forgot why you were a fan of Max, you're going to remember why you were a fan of Max. And, I thought he was good. I thought he was even better in the HBO one 7 or 8 years ago, the Magic and Larry one. But, Max is perfect for those situations because there's nothing politically correct about him then or now. So it was great to see. And it made me realize, as someone who was young, who was a kid then, that I got to call 2 Celtics-Lakers NBA Finals, which came completely out of nowhere because in 2007, those are 2 franchises going nowhere, and in 2008 and 2010, Celtics and Lakers are playing for the championship, and that was pretty cool to be a part of. I can't imagine what it was like at the apex of it.
Well, we need one, before we go, final question, we need one Cedric Maxwell story.
Yes.
And I know you have many of them.
There are many. The best ones are the ones I can't, ones I usually can't say on the air because of language. But my favorite story was I think my first year with the team. We played in Detroit in the playoffs in 2002, And what Max was not used to, when you go to the playoffs, and he hadn't been there before, because remember the Celtics hadn't been in the playoffs 6-7 years, you have those extra long timeouts. So you're back from commercial, but the players are still on the bench, and there's that long break. He had stepped away from the headset, and he was on his phone. He was doing something. And as he was sitting back down, they were handing out the stat sheets, as they often do, as they do during the timeouts for you to look at. He didn't realize we were back on the air, so simultaneously, as I'm welcoming people back, he puts on his headset as the guy who was handing out the stats passes him by and doesn't hand him one. And as he puts his headset back on, he says, "Thanks a lot, you bleep and bleep," not realizing that we were on the air at the time. So now I have a problem, because now I have to communicate to him what he did and communicate with my eyes that we are on the air now without saying, "Hey, you bleep and bleep, we're on the air and you just said that thing." So it was, I think I said something like Sean Grande, Sam Kinison back in Detroit and whatever. But yeah,
that's great.
There's a million Max stories. It's been
chemistry.
he's the one who called me in Minnesota in the summer of 2001, and I had turned down the job twice, and it was his phone call that started to turn me on to the idea of coming back to Boston and the things that we might be able to do together as a team.
Well, we're all better off for it. That's terrific.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being on our show. You truly are one of the class acts in Boston sports, and you are ingrained when you talk about Sean Grande and the Celtics. Just for the generation, you are their Johnny Most. And that's saying a lot. So thank you again, Sean. I hope to have you on the show again in the future. Want to thank the boys. Want to thank everyone behind the scenes. Of course, the lovely and talented Adrian and handsome Todd. Please check us out on our website at thegrandstanders.com. And tune in again next Wednesday night at 6:30. We have a special guest. The governor's back. Governor Michael Dukakis will be back on the show to talk about the Red Sox. My name is Scott Kerman. Have a great and happy night.
Thanks, Sean. That
Sean, that was awesome.
That was such perfect.
Oh, Scott Kerman, have a great and happy night. The elephants are in town.